On today's History of Politics, we're going to talk about Article 4 of the Constitution. We've already discussed Articles 1 through 3. We know that there are a total of 7 articles. So you have the preamble, you have the 7 articles, and then you have the 27 amendments, the first 10 being what's called the Bill of Rights. Okay? The preamble is the introduction. The articles basically establish things. They establish how the government is and then the government's relationship to the states. And then finally come the Bill of Rights that deal with the people. And that's part of the amendments, the first 10 being the Bill of Rights, what the people are guaranteed, and then any corrections and thereforth afterwards. Remember, the Constitution is what's called a fluid document. And there's a provision in the Constitution to show how you can make amendments and changes to it, because the founding fathers, those men in denim that were farmers and so on, they realized that they didn't know everything. They understood that, and they understood that things would change, just as during their time, what their time was different than the Stone Age. Our time is different from their time. We don't have the threat of invasion. Yeah, I said that clearly, despite what Donald Trump said. We don't have a threat of invasion as the founding fathers did from Britain as they were trying to escape King George. We don't have Vladimir Putin, at least not at this point, trying to invade the U.S. like he is in Ukraine. So times change, and there's a mechanism to change the Constitution to meet the times. But it is a strict, and thorough process requiring 2/3 a vote of the Senate, 2/3 a vote of the House, and 38 out of the 50 states to ratify it or put it into effect. And that's a high bar to cross. Anyway, today we're going to talk about Article 4. We already talked about the 3 co-equal branches of government: the legislative, which makes the laws; the executive, which executes the laws; and the judicial, which rules if the laws are legal, in case a challenge comes up. Now we're going to talk about Article 4. And what that deals with is the relationships between the states and the federal government. Okay? Where the federal government and the state meet each other and how the states deal with each other. And in Section 1 of Article 4, the first thing is the full faith and credit clause. And what that means, what that's talking about, is that the states must respect the public acts, the rights, the records, and judicial privileges of other states. So what exactly does that mean? If you have a driver's license in Pennsylvania and you go to drive through Tennessee, say, Tennessee must respect your Pennsylvania driver's license and vice versa. On the same note, if you accrued child support in New York and you move to Kansas, Kansas must respect that court order for child support to be paid and pursue you for it. And there's another thing too, but we're going to get to that later on because that's covered separately. But I would actually put it into the same thing because it does involve judicial proceedings. Section 2 deals with privileges, immunity, and extradition. Now, this is like the extension that I just mentioned that comes off of the full faith and credit clause and the respecting of judicial proceedings from other states. And what this talks about is basically that states have to recognize each other, the legal proceedings of each other's, right? Now, the extradition part comes here. If, say, you have a fugitive from Colorado and that fugitive goes into Utah, and Utah upon finding out that there's a fugitive living in Utah from Colorado, Utah captures him. Utah has to take him back to, or send him back to Colorado. How it works is one of two ways. Normally, you would sit in jail 30 days to see if Colorado's going to come and collect you, because sometimes you might be a fugitive on paper, but the crime is so small that it doesn't equal the expense. Suppose you had a parking ticket warrant from Colorado and the bail was only $100, okay? Which can happen. Times are hard. And you go to Utah and you get stopped in Utah, and Utah does a search of your driver's license, and boom, it pops up on NCIC that you have a warrant from Colorado. By law, they have to arrest you on that judicial warrant. Notice I said judicial. They have to arrest you on that judicial warrant. A judicial warrant is a warrant issued by a judge, plain and simple, or by the court. They have to arrest you on it, and then they contact Colorado, let them know that they have you, and Colorado has 30 days to come and collect you if they want to. Now, the other thing is you can waive your right to extradition and voluntarily go back, where you're requesting them to come get you. Okay, it works almost the same as habeas corpus, whereas you're telling the court, okay, I'll deal with you, come get me. Most people, there are a few cases where people will waive extradition and make it easy, but there's a lot of people that don't. They say, come and get me if you want me that bad. Now, historically, there was also a part of that provision for fugitive slaves, which was if a slave escaped from Alabama, say, and that slave went to North Carolina, North Carolina would be obligated to return that slave back to Alabama and his owner. Here's the thing about that. The 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, wiped that part of it out. Okay, because the 13th Amendment abolished slavery, so if there's no slaves, there's no fugitive slave recovery, there's no law there, so there's no need to bring them back. And that basically is the end of that. It abolished that. The 13th Amendment abolished this particular part of Article 4, Section 2, and it also abolished slavery, as we all know. Section 3 is the Admission of States Clause. And what happens there, what it basically says is that Congress has the power to admit states into the Union. Only Congress has that power, not the president. The president can't just go out and say, okay, you're a state now. Congress has that power. As Puerto Rico is a U.S. possession right now, if Congress were so inclined, they could admit Puerto Rico as a state. That would be righteously our 51st state. They could do that because it's a U.S. possession. They could do that anyway. But they cannot grab Mexico. Mexico would have to request to become a U.S. possession or a U.S. state, and Congress could admit them. Conversely, however, you have the Territorial Powers Clause, where Congress maintains the power to dispose of or regulate any U.S. territory, which means that if you live in the U.S., your state, Congress can impose laws upon you, but only certain laws. Okay, you can't change punishments or change laws that are already on the books per se like that. However, Congress does have the right to impose regulations on states and they can also dispose of a state, even though I have not seen Congress ever historically dispose of a state. They've admitted a great number of them. Remember, we only started out with 13, and we're now at 50. So we've admitted a lot of states, but we've never disposed of any state. And finally, in Section 4, we have the Guarantee Clause. The Guarantee Clause provides that the federal government must protect every U.S. state from invasion, meaning that if Vladimir Putin tries to come into Washington state and tries to take it over and brings force with him, the federal government must respond and protect Washington state, whether it's Washington state, California, Texas, Vermont, Maine, anywhere, even if it's in the heart of the country, in the Midwest, doesn't matter. If a foreign invader or a foreign state comes to do damage, the federal government must protect it. And finally, in Section 4, we have actually, I'm looking at notes here, so forgive me. We have the Protection Clause. I think I improperly used that. The first one was the Guarantee Clause that I just talked about. The last one is the Protective Clause. And what the Protective Clause basically indicates to us is that the federal government must protect all states from invasion and, I'm sorry. I've screwed this all up. I'm terribly sorry. The Guarantee Clause allows that every state will have a government elected by and for the people. Okay, free and fair elections. Every state will have a government just as the federal government is a government elected by and for the people. The states shall have the same type of government. Now, way back when, they called it a Republican government. Okay, that's what the actual text says, but let's be clear. When they said Republican in that vein, they did not mean Republican Party. That's not what they meant. They meant it the same way that this country was a republic, and a republic utilizes a particular type of government, and the type of government that we use is democracy, where we vote in through free and fair elections a government to represent us. Not a government that rules us, but a government that represents us. That's the Guarantee Clause. The Protection Clause is the one that guarantees that the federal government will protect all of the states from invasion and also domestic violence. If there's an insurrection or an uprising against the government, the federal government can step into it only if the state legislature and the governor of that state has asked them to. And this is why Donald Trump just got caught violating the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878 because, number one, he didn't ask Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom did not ask him to put the troops into his state. That's one. Number two, so there's the provision of Article 4, Section 4. They didn't ask for the troops. And then secondly, the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878 clearly states that you cannot use U.S. troops to do civilian law enforcement duties unless it's an insurrection or it's a violent uprising. And no, there was no violent uprising in Los Angeles. There just wasn't. Donald Trump lied about that. Donald Trump uses false emergencies and excuses in order to make power grabs and take money that's earmarked for other causes and use them for his own causes. He did that in his first term when he wanted to build that goddamn wall, which he stole $80 billion from the military, earmarked for building housing and schools on military bases for military families and their children. He stole that money, but to use for his wall. But here's the thing. The wall would have cost upwards of $1 trillion the way he wanted it. So that never materialized. And what he took from the military was a mere speck. It didn't get the job done, but he still did it. Anyway, that's Article 4 of the Constitution. If you learned something today, listen, political discourse, respectful political discourse is welcome. Comment, but I'm going to advise you now because I read all of the comments. And if you do something, say something disrespectful, that typical MAGA bullshit, I'm telling you, you're going to get hit with it right back before I delete and block you. Just saying. So watch your mouth. Be respectful. You can ask any question you want, but make it a righteous question. Like an intelligent person. I know some folks have a problem with that concept. Otherwise, like, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.